So in this video, I'm going to go over the first step in the in-class assignment from week 1, which will be to export a data set that's in R to our local machine. If you're on a virtual machine or virtual desktop, you'll have to export it to your iDrive or your OneDrive, just to make sure that when you log into another virtual machine, you don't lose it. Because if it's not saved to those locations, you will. So I've opened RStudio. I'll close the script that I had open. So you'll see here is the console, and without loading any other packages or anything else in R, if we just type in warpbreaks, we can see that it's a data set that already exists within R. So we reviewed this in class, but it's got 3 variables: breaks, wool, tension. So the goal of the in-class assignment is to actually export this so that we can then import it into SAS. So I'm just going to create an R script, which if you go up to this little plus icon, the R script is basically a kind of a text editor where you put your code, and then you can also save your script for future use. So the function that we'll actually be using, and so if you just first let me just show you, if you just have the data here or the line of code here in R, warp breaks, when we run this line, you can either press run here, so that ran it. You can also press Control Enter within RStudio, or Control R to run. Actually, Control R doesn't work within RStudio. Perhaps I changed the hotkeys. But either way, there's the run button itself, and then there are associated hotkeys in order to run the code. So that is essentially the same thing that we did down in the console. Whatever you do down in the console, the bottom left is not saved. It's just kind of a way to access the command line. And so what we're going to do is output this data set warp breaks using the function write.csv. So in R, putting a question mark before a function will allow you to access the help file. So if I run that line, you'll see the help file comes out up. So write table, write.csv essentially uses this more generic function, write table. So when we look at an R function, you can see usually it takes the following form. So that first there's the function itself, then there's parentheses, so an opening parentheses, and then finally a closed parentheses. And within those parentheses can be 1 or more arguments. And these are things you supply to the function in order to get your desired results from it. So in this one, you can see there's X, for example, is the first argument, file equals, and then there are a series of other arguments. So when we look at X, down here it tells us what that argument actually is. So it's the object to be written, matrix or data frame. So in this case, warp breaks will be our X. That's what we're trying to output. And then file is basically telling you exactly where you want the file to go. And then there are a series of other arguments. Quote, if it's true, basically any character data will be output with quotations around them. One that's useful for our purposes is row names. So when you supply false for row names, that will suppress the output of row names. So if you see our warp breaks data over here, you have these row names 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this will be output in the first column if we don't tell it to suppress the row names. So what we're going to do is write our function, so write.csv, and then when we open the bracket or open the parentheses, our first argument will be what we're trying to output, so that's warp breaks, and then our second argument will be where we want to output it. Now I'm going to use my desktop. If you're on a virtual machine, again, use your iDrive or your OneDrive. And then the other argument I'm going to supply is row.names equals false to suppress those. Now, a couple things about the way this is written. You can say x equals, that is perfectly fine. Or, if you supply the arguments in the order that they're anticipated, you don't have to actually supply the argument name with it. So if you notice row names here, we have to supply the argument name here because this row names is not, with the way the function is written, it's not the third argument. The third argument is actually append. Okay, so we actually have to be explicit about which argument we're referring to after that. So I'm going to run this. Hopefully I have the file path correct. As you can see, there were no errors, so that means that it was written. So if I go to my desktop, you can see here it was written to my desktop, the warpbreaks data set. So this video that's the end of this particular video for showing how to output the data set from R, and then in the next video we'll show how to pull that into SAS.